Yo, JG the PT, back with another video for the JGang. If you haven't become a member already, I suggest you hit the subscribe button and the notification button. You can follow me on Instagram or Snapchat for more dope shit at JG_the PT. Got a Facebook page too, so check that out. Now today, I'm going to be talking about heart rate reserve and VO2 Max. Now this video is a reply to my boy Mitchell. He left a comment on one of my YouTube videos asking if I can make a video on heart rate reserve and VO2 Max. So let's get into the video. Right, so if we're going to talk about this, first we need to start with heart rate reserve. Heart rate reserve is the difference between your heart rate max and your heart rate rest. But in order to find that out, you have to know what your heart rate max is. Now, unless you go into a lab and you do like a VO2 max test, where they put a mask on you to measure how much oxygen you're breathing in and breathing out whilst you're exercising, and they will take you to a point where you get to where you're working at your max heart rate, and then because you're working at your max heart rate, they can then determine what your VO2 max is. Unless you're doing that, you're not going to know precisely what it is, your true heart rate max, so we use formulas to estimate your heart rate max. Now, I believe the best formula to be the Gelish formula. I think it's way more accurate than 220 minus age. There are certain inconsistencies with 220 minus age. Depending on how old you are, it will either decrease or increase the accuracy of using that formula. So I would use the Gelish formula. I think it's far more accurate. Now the Gelish formula for estimating your maximum heart rate is 206.9 minus, then in brackets, 0.67 multiplied by your age. So if we do that, you now have an estimate for what your heart rate max is. Now, we can use that heart rate max to calculate your heart rate reserve using what we call the Carvone Method. Now, the Carvone Method, I'm just going to put it up on the screen because I tried to film this once before, and when I talked through the equation, it just got a bit complicated, didn't really make any sense, so I'm just going to put it up on the screen. Now, the way you would go about using this is you would use this equation, the Carvone Method, to calculate percentages of your heart rate reserve. So let's say you want to do sprint training, right? You want to do some anaerobic cardio, specifically sprint training, and you wanted to train sort of 80 to 90% of your heart rate. You're going all out. You would take your heart rate max minus your heart rate rest in brackets, and then multiply that by 0.8, then close the bracket again, add your heart rate rest, and that would give you 80% of your heart rate reserve. And you do the same thing again, but instead of multiplying it by 0.8, you'd multiply by 0.9, and that would give you a percentage, that would give you 90% of your heart rate reserve. And then you would know that you were trying to train within that range. So let's say you went through those calculations and you found that 80% of your heart rate reserve was 169 beats per minute, and that 90% of your heart rate reserve was like, I don't know, any number, fucking 180 beats per minute. You would know that when you're sprinting, you're trying to get your heart rate to be in between 169 and 180 beats per minute in order to be training at the correct intensity for the stimulus that you are trying to place on your body in order to cause it to adapt in the way that you want it to. So we've talked about heart rate max, how to calculate it, heart rate reserve, and then how you can use your heart rate max and your heart rate rest to calculate that. Oh yeah, real quick, to find out what your heart rate rest is, your how many beats per minute your heart does whilst you're rested, what you'll do is in the morning, as soon as you wake up, take your pulse. I would do mine from the radial artery, so the pulse on your wrist. Use 2 fingers, do not use your thumb, you have a pulse in your thumb. So you take that pulse, you would set a timer for 15 seconds, you would count how many beats you feel take place within those 15 seconds, and you multiply that by 4, and that would give you an idea of what your resting heart rate is, because you do it in the morning once you've woken up, because you haven't done anything else. You've been laying in a bed for 6 to 8 hours, pretty well fucking rested. You haven't been getting up and going to work, you haven't worked out, you haven't encountered any sort of physical stress that would cause your heart rate to be higher than it would be if you were completely rested and at rest. So yeah, so we talked about heart rate at rest, how to find that, heart rate reserve, how to calculate that, and heart rate max, and how to calculate that. Now, all that leaves us with is VO2, VO2 max. Now, to put it simply, VO2 max is simply a numerical measurement that we use to assess your body's ability to consume oxygen. Now, your VO2 max is how much oxygen your body can consume in milliliters per kilogram of your body weight each minute whilst you're exercising at your max heart rate. So that's what your VO2 max is. Now, the deal with VO2 max is it used to be believed that if you had a higher VO2 max, that you were essentially a better athlete over another athlete with a lower VO2 max. However, as science has evolved and thinking methods have developed, we've realised that's not the case. It's only half of the equation. Your VO2 max is not the ultimate decider of how good you are at your sport. There's also skeletal muscle, how well you move, your biomechanics when you're running or when you're exercising or performing your sport, your technique, your gait, your movement patterns. There's more that comes into it. However, we use VO2 max just to get some sort of tangible, objective measurement of your body's ability to consume oxygen, because if you can consume more oxygen and you can use it more efficiently, you can perform at a higher intensity for longer before you tire out and before you get fatigued. So how do you improve VO2 max? Essentially, all you really need to do is just fucking do cardio. So the reason I said there's no such thing as VO2 max training is because the way you would go about improving your VO2 max is the same way you would go about improving your aerobic or your anaerobic abilities. You would simply do cardio, and as long as you were applying the principle of progressive overload to your cardiovascular training, you would improve your VO2 max score. Now, when it comes to improving your VO2 max, anaerobic cardio is better at improving it than aerobic cardio, simply because when you do anaerobic cardio, high intensity interval training or something like that, you're working at a higher intensity, so you'll be closer to your VO2 max. And if you work at an intensity that's closer to your VO2 max, you are more likely to improve your VO2 max. It's kind of like strength training, right? If you want to improve your 1 rep max, there's no point doing training with your 20 rep max. Whereas if you train with your 6 rep max or your 3 rep max, you're way more likely to improve your 1 rep max. So that's kind of a little analogy there that you can use to compare the two. Now, if that's what they are, how do you find out your VO2 max? Because I've explained to you how to find out your heart rate max, your heart rate rest, and your heart rate reserve, but how do you find out your VO2 max? Now, unless you are in a laboratory and they put you on a treadmill with a mask on your face to measure how much oxygen you are breathing in and breathing out, and they get you to exercise at your heart rate max, and they build you up, exercise that gets progressively harder in order to determine what your VO2 max is and what your oxygen consumption is when you're exercising at the highest intensity that you can. Unless you're doing that, you're not going to have an exact calculation for your VO2 max. Now, a laboratory testing is it's not viable or accessible for most people. So there are other ways you can go about calculating your VO2 max. I do it with my clients either using the Brigham Young University jog test or the 1.5 mile sprint test. Now, the way you do these two is, the Brigham Young University jog test, essentially you warm up on a treadmill and then you get to a pace where you feel like you could comfortably run a mile. You run a mile, you time how long it takes you to run a mile, and then you can use a calculator. I'll put the link to the calculator down below in the description. You enter in your agenda, your weight, how long it took you to run the mile, and then that will give you an estimate of your VO2 max, and then you'd use normative data to compare yourself to other males or other females in your age range to see where you fall in terms of, do you have a poor VO2 max or do you have a high VO2 max. I'll put the link to normative data down below in the description. And then the 1.5 mile sprint test, or the 1.5 mile run test, is you essentially run a mile and a half as fast as you fucking can. You time how long it takes you to do it, and then you go to the calculator and you fucking enter in the details, and it will calculate your VO2 max based off the details that you have provided it. I hope it helped. I hope it explained some things. If you like the video, share the shit, comment down below if you have any more questions, subscribe if you haven't already, follow me on Instagram and Snapchat, JG_PT, check out the Facebook page too. See you in the next video. Peace!